Hello, everybody, and welcome to City Lights Live. I'm your host, Peter Maravellis, and tonight we are thrilled to be presenting another event with our friends over at Wave Books. Over the years, Wave has been publishing some of the best in contemporary poetry with absolutely gorgeous editions and high production values. We will be celebrating tonight one of their stellar recent releases. We are delighted to have with us Dorothea Lasky. She's going to be reading from a new collection, The Shining. Dorothea is the author of 7 books of poetry and prose. These include Animal, which was also produced by Wave Books. She's also the editor of Essays, published by Essays Press, and co-editor of Open the Door, How to Excite Young People About Poetry, published by the fabulous McSweeney's. Currently, she lives in New York City and teaches poetry at Columbia University School of the Arts. Joining her tonight to be reading as well is none other than Brian Evenson. We've had the great pleasure of featuring him in the past. He is the award-winning author of over a dozen books of fiction, most recently the collection Glassy Burning Floor of Hell Stories, which is published by wonderful Coffee House Press, another really great indie press. His work has been translated into numerous languages, and he makes his home in Los Angeles and teaches in the Critical Studies program at Cal Arts. Before we begin, I would like to remind everyone we are beaming to you from the unceded ancestral homelands of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples. I'd like to take this moment to acknowledge those who have come before us as stewards of the land and offer our respect. I want to remind everyone, too, that as with every event, we'll be posting links in the chat function of your Zoom dashboard with which you may purchase copies of Dorothea's books as well as Brian's. There will also be time for Q&A at the end of the evening, so if you have any questions, comments, please do post them in the chat function. So please join us now in offering a warm welcome to Dorothea Lasky and Brian Evenson. Welcome to City Lights.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great to be here. Thank you so much for having us. Okay, well, I guess that I'm going to start reading first. That sounds good to everyone. And I'm going to be reading, yes, from my book, The Shining, which is, relatively new. And I'm just so excited to read with you, Brian. And I'm a big fan, and it's just wonderful, to be here with you.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here too.
Yeah, and to celebrate, to celebrate horror in all its forms, I guess. So I'm just gonna, be reading some poems, and as I was writing this book, I kind of thought about, different perspectives that are in The Shining, both in the movie and in the book, and sort of how, it might be possible to embody them. And in the book I kind of bounce around lots of different ones, but I wrote a self-portrait from maybe the most enduring perspective that means so much to me, which is the eye of Wendy, the wife in The Shining. So I'm just going to share a poem to her because really the whole book is a little bit of a love letter to her. So this poem is called Self-Portrait in the Hotel. I am here by myself, and I have finished everything. There are no pretensions, no way around the door. I have eaten all the cans of beans and lemons, and am face drunk on the floor. There are no cats here, only children, crawling around above me. Yes, they look at me. They absolutely do not know me. They want to look at me and tell me they know. They are fed and ready for the ceremony. I haven't prepared anything. I am so wholly unprepared for this. I was told I'd have a lifetime. Now the whole thing is coming at me. I can't even see myself in the mirror or in the space between the mirror and the wall. He brings me to the gray fixtures and mentions that we are dead. Who didn't know that when I checked into this God-forsaken hellhole? They locked me in the tiny yellow room with no belongings but my lipstick and said I'd be okay as long as I didn't make a movement. In and out he entered me, letting me know what I could or could not say. I wasn't saying anything. I never wanted to say a thing. I only wanted to see myself as vast and unknowable in some horrific ocean. Instead, they drove me for hours, and up on the lands I wandered, red boots and a dark brown coat. I collected aqua pencils, 4 of them. They said it's your job now to tell this story, but I was no storyteller. I was an action figure that had no set box. I was tied up inside the cardboard. A little person took me down and drooled all over me. I was not a seer at all, and they knew it. I was only her and will be forever. And when you see her empty eyes, that's me, except my eyes are gleaming. And when there are tears, I will cry them, only for the days that have left me. They drove me here and locked me in a tiny yellow room. They said to be quiet, but I am not able to be quiet any longer. I think one of the things that always kind of drew me to The Shining, especially, the movie, is a lot of the imagery and objects are very reminiscent of my own childhood, just like the times, that it was made and my certain age. And so I got kind of fixated right in the book and thinking about some of those objects. So this is a poem kind of in homage to the lion or tiger stuffed animal that Danny is on, if people remember, for those who celebrate that that moment. A lion. In the bedroom after fainting, the therapist comes in. In the bed, a stuffed lion who sits behind the boy in utter repose. I think that I have found the way back in, although I am not quite there yet. You could have picked anyone. I chose to see the inner life. It was orange, cream, and beating. I think one of the things I love about horror and The Shining in general is just its relationship to time. And I think it does something very interesting with time that poetry does as well, and making time kind of this eternal kind of moment, eternal present in a way. And so this is a poem a little bit about that, and it's called Old Photo. It says 1921 in the picture, and I am smiling, but it's not me anymore, or maybe it never was. He gets so angry when he is drunk and throws the baby across the room. I get so angry when I am ready. I throw myself into oblivion. It says 1999 in the picture. I am wearing a purple dress. There are great planets circling and ahead of me. I never asked for this to be my name. He put a set of pictures up on the wooden wall. He said, "Find yourself." But that part was easy. So when you write a book called The Shining, there are so many kind of iconic images and scenes that I feel like you have to just give homage to. So some of these poems are just that. And this poem is to the infamous Gold Ballroom. The Gold Ballroom. A dress that is high in the neck is best to see yourself in. I have come here from far away to see what time could do to me. Everywhere there is the woman slouched over her drink in the season of despair, as it's always nighttime here. Or should I say there's always a becoming? I lay my life in front of you without cause, and you take stock of it, deem it not worthy. I was always the right person to medicate danger. I take out my little metal purse, so many vials and exactitude, so many moments where the past was left waiting. I take out my tiny succulent angels. If you won't have me, will you at least try them? They've been in their jars for all eternity. Surely something could come out of it. And if not, let's glide across this carpet, you and I, so gracefully. What you don't know in story, I'll give to you in action. I take out my tiny new beginning and ask you to think again. Maybe this time will be different. I glide you across the carpet that is pink and gold, and you must admit the swirl of time provides us an opening. You take stock of my life and deem it wholly acceptable. I take out my tiny book and read you these words, and even you must admit there was always something there. There was always something there that was waiting. Here's another poem to time. Time. When I was brought here, it looked just like the mountains, but it wasn't. It was my life. Eat, you little vermin. And this is probably bad karma. There goes the calendar, a kind of predator. Legs and sneakers like knives because I am way stronger than I ever thought I was. I was Dorothea Lasky. Now my name is nothing. But I never forgot my name. Did you? And again, when you write a book called The Shining, there's some images you have to kind of move in. And so you got to have the twins. So I have some I have some twins in here. And here's a poem to them, as you know, one of the poems. And it's called Blue Christmas. I am so excited. I am dancing with my sister in the front of the restaurant. Two men look at us and sniffle. We are wearing the clearest blue dresses that look like the sky in the middle of the spring. There is a pretend antagonism to our song, but we know that we really love each other. Years later, they will film us as children wearing matching dresses again, but the blue will be muted. Soon after, they will show us chopped up. As always, they will be obsessed with the violence men can do to us. But I was only ever trying to do my job. I only ever wanted to be a movie star. And this poem is called Red Rum. Lipstick is one of the very finest elixirs. It has a soft consistency and can write on glass. Red rum is sweet and candied with cherries from the bottom of the bottle. We sip it so gracefully. I am in love again. His name is something, but who can remember? Memory is a lake and all of that. I can't remember where I left my last exercise. I was only ever sitting here, watching the neon burn out. I have taken my red lipstick and written help across my chest. He looks at it so kindly. I know I am real again. I can feel the sweet bitters of the drink make me into a woman. I am not crying. I am writing sonnets in my mind about all of the vacations we will take after this one. I throw the glass against the wall. The only thing that matters in love is passion. So again, just thinking of things that one has to get at when you write a book called The Shining, I have about 50 poems with mazes in this book because I've always been really obsessed with the maze outside of the of The Shining and the maze inside, and just mazes in general are pretty fascinating. And also, you know, Jack's tie, which supposedly kind of has the maze imagery on it. And I hopefully am going to venture out to the Stanley Hotel this spring and hopefully stay there for a night in room 217. And I know they have a maze there, so I hope to go in the maze and take pictures, and maybe I can, yeah, share them with you all. But so I'll read some maze poems. Maze. I was always just a little lady, but I am sick of pretending you actually know what you're talking about. We go around and around and say nothing. We do this for so many years. It's sunny outside for most of it, but we do not go out there. We stay inside. The more people that come into the house, the lonelier we feel. Of course, they don't understand artists, and you are one. You definitely know the rhythm of language put into squares and then funneled out a little conveyor belt. You love excising the drama from anything. I listen greedily, but it makes me very bad. It's like eating worms that have already eaten my body. You feed them to me like candy. You stuff them into my mouth as you are talking, knocking me over and trying to enter me. And then one day I go outside. I run around the grassy puzzle. I try to make sense of what is glistening. You stand over it, in my dreams and elsewhere. You are as big as any devil. You look with your eyes on me, and I am both flattered and also flattened. I had no chance here. I was only always the little lady. You were more than that. You held the grand design. Blue hallway. I am going up the steps with a knife. I am scared and looking around. I feel everything so acutely, despite the lack of acute attention. My husband is trying to kill me. I am trying to outsmart him, but all around me are the ghosts. I turn my head and see a bear and a man. This isn't at all the way I imagined it. I have learned not to imagine anything. I keep running with the knife. I go into my little apartment and lock the door. It's no use because the ghosts are here too. Outside the window, it is radioactive. In fact, I can't even begin to tell you how scared I am to go out there again. I sit on my bed and look at the mirror. There is a refrigerator. I could eat something. Instead, I get a glass of water. I decide that actually now is the time to dance. I call up a song on the radio. I request it with my mind. Now for effect I am turning and turning. No one can see me. Then I invite them all in. All the people I was running from are here now. I am in the place I have dreamt about. I am in the space that has kept me up every night. Even my brother is finally here. We are having a party. I get out the cut cheese and meat logs. People discuss their hair. I have hairy legs from so many months indoors. I've always liked everything furry. I get out my paint collection. Now it's time for art class. I get out my clean brushes. Everyone sits down and I say hush. My son and husband are here. They are so proud of me. I discuss the effects of line on paper and the ways in which form is everything. I use a tiny pencil to outline the edges. I am painting an orange. Suddenly someone gasps. An orange is genius. Then I start crying and crying. I've always secretly known that I was a genius. I was just waiting for this moment. All my life I was just waiting to be in this hell here and to be called a genius. I pretend to act demure and bat my heavy eyelashes. My husband says, "Oh, I knew she was a genius from the moment I laid eyes on her." He hands me a dry martini. I take a drink. This is my night, after all. And I think I'll just read two more poems. This next poem is called A Lovely World. I am walking through the hotel. Every time I am so sad that I want to die. It's a place where I can keep everything I've never been brave enough to get to. Poets have moons and money to get themselves through the longest night imaginable, but I've had these rooms to beckon me with their own brand of patience. The warmest rose emanates from the hall near my bedroom. I'll enter if you will. I know that in this world I will always be waiting, but you let go of life with a thud. Instead, I waited for you, hiding here in plain sight, like a flower. And this last poem is called Framed Pictures. At the very last moment, it is morning. Nothing is redemptive about it. There's a buffet breakfast somewhere that no one cares about. It's the next day. After hours of sex in the garden, we are walking across the golden walkway. A lion is running. He shouts that the green city is near. But something else propels us, not the stale brown liquid or rubbery proteins, but the overflowing sugar of memory that these objects hold. Across the golden path, 21 pictures wait for you. You will keep walking till you see the one you were destined for. People think this is all an accident. They think life could happen to anyone. When you see it, you will be drawn to the image of yourself in that forgotten year, his face being watered down by the elements for too many moments. He will be smiling at a party, and you will recognize what he's saying. The dead only speak through poetry, so make the poems be the things that you give everything. They must carry on. Thank you so much, and I'm so excited to hear Brian read now.
Thanks so much. That was terrific, Dorothea. Wave is a great press, but in addition, I mean, I think that this book is so interesting because it takes The Shining and all the kind of like edges of The Shining and plays around with it and does some really interesting things. Which, if you know that movie and know that book, it's just a really intriguing book to read. So do support Wave, do support Dorothea, do support City Lights by buying the book if you can. I'm going to read a new piece. I have a book that's coming out from Coffee House Press in next year in 2024, which is called Good Night, Sleep Tight. And I'm going to read just part of a story from that. This is a story called The Sequence. There's two characters in that, both female, Sidra and Celine, who are twins, and they're young. The Sequence. When she was young, Sidra and her twin sister used to play a game. They used to play lots of games, but this was, so far as Sidra could remember, the only game they were careful about, the only one they never played somewhere where adults would see. Except, of course, their grandfather. Because of his condition, they felt it did not really matter if he could see them. Though later they, or at least Sidra, came to feel differently. It was Sidra's twin who started it. Sidra never would have thought up the game on her own. At the time, she was not sure exactly how Celine had come up with it. Later, she thought perhaps her twin hadn't thought it up on her own after all. Perhaps something had whispered the rules of the game in her ear. And though she had not consciously heard them, she had still taken them in. Perhaps her twin had felt she was making up a game from scratch when, in fact, she'd been tricked into playing it all along. The game began something like this. Sidra was gathering buttercups into a heap, and Celine was stirring an anthill slowly with a stick, when suddenly Celine stood up and said, "Do you want to play a game?" This confused Sidra a little. "But we're already playing games," she said. Celine made a little disgusted noise and brushed the hair out of her eyes. She was sweaty and dirty, but so was Sidra. They were always just as sweaty and dirty as each other. That was, Sidra felt, part of being a twin. "This isn't really a game," Celine said. She gestured at the stick pointing out of the anthill, a stream now with confused ants. Then she gestured at the pile of wilted buttercups. "That isn't either." Ants had made their way into the flowers as well, Sidra saw, were swarming all over them. "These are the kinds of things people do when they can't think of a game." Celine shrugged. "Okay, what do you want to play?" Sidra stretched out her hand. Celine stretched out her hand, sorry. "Come on," she said, "I'll show you." Her twin led her away from the anthill and the buttercups and across the lawn to where their grandfather's wheelchair was. He sat in it, slightly slouched, a parasol wired to the wheelchair's frame and unfurled above him. He was dressed to go out. Their mother always dressed him like that, even though she never took him anywhere. The only thing she did was roll him out of the house and park him in the yard. She would check on him every hour or two, charging the girls with letting her know if anything went wrong in the meantime. "Hi, Grandpa," said Celine to him, and Sidra echoed, "Hi, Grandpa." He didn't respond, or hardly did. Behind his greasy lensed glasses, he blinked. That was all he could ever manage. He had been paralyzed for as long as Sidra had been alive. She had asked her mother about it once, asked why he didn't move, and her mother had sighed. "Nobody knows why," she said. One day her father had been walking and talking like normal, and then, abruptly, he collapsed. He hadn't moved since. "We're going to play a great game, Grandpa," said Celine, and their grandfather blinked again. One blink. Probably means yes, or I understand, thought Sidra. If it means anything at all, maybe it means nothing. "Is Grandpa playing too?" asked Sidra. Celine shook her head. He's just the starting line, she said. Then she turned to their grandfather. No offense, she told him. He blinked again. Celine looked at Sidra. You need to do everything I do, she told her, exactly as I do it, and in the exact same way. Why? That's the game, said Celine. Step where I step, exactly. Move like me, too. It should be easy for you because we have the same size feet. If we weren't twins, probably only one of us could play. This confused Sidra, but she nodded. All right then, said Celine. Her face was creased, her gaze abstracted, as if she were listening hard, trying to hear something far away. Let's begin. Her twin moved forward until the toe of one foot was touching the rubber of the wheelchair's wheel, her opposite hip knocking against her grandfather's knees. She sidestepped, clapped once, then stepped backward while sucking in a deep breath. All the while, their grandfather was blinking, more rapidly than Sidra had ever seen him blink before. What did it mean? Her twin took another step, clapped, then peered back over her shoulder, encouraging Sidra to repeat the pattern. Sidra did. She moved toward her grandfather until the toe of her shoe touched the wheel. That close to her grandfather, pressed against his leg, she could smell his body. She did not care for the sour smell of him. But despite that, she concentrated on doing everything her twin had done and doing it all exactly right. That was the game, after all. Good, murmured Celine, and began another sequence. This time, Sidra followed her closely, staying only a step or two behind, putting her foot into the impression Celine's feet had left in the grass before they could disappear. And this time, with this new sequence, Sidra felt something had begun to change. Not something she could see exactly, more something she could sense. The air seemed stiller than elsewhere on the lawn, and the light was becoming different too. This scared Sidra a little, but since Celine kept moving forward, Sidra did too. Sidra had been born second, and ever since she had always followed behind Celine. They turned right and took a few dozen steps, touching the toe of one step to the heel of the next, picking a quiet, gapless line across the lawn. There was their grandfather to one side, a little way away now. It looked to Sidra as if a pane of dirty glass now lay between them and him, leaching him of color. And then Celine stepped sideways, and suddenly the hum of insects, the sighing of the gentle breeze, the chirping of birds all vanished. Sidra couldn't hear any of it anymore, couldn't even hear her sister's footsteps. In front of her, she saw her sister clap her hands together in the air, but Sidra couldn't hear that either. She could feel it, though, could almost see the soundless sound ripple out through the air toward her. She could see the air shiver, and for just a moment, a transparent wall became vaguely visible beside her. And then the shiver stopped, and the wall faded away, becoming invisible again. Or nearly so. Perhaps that was what was making their grandfather seem drained of color. The house, too, had faded, felt less present, less real. Suddenly, Sidra began to be afraid of where her sister was taking her. I don't like this game, she said. I want to go home. But no sound came out of her mouth, none at least that she could hear. Only that same ripple through the air, a brief coalescing into being of that translucent wall beside her. But her sister felt it. She turned her head to face her finger pressed hard to her lips. Because the game demanded she do what her sister did, Sidra turned her head too and pressed her own finger to her own lips, even though she was not sure her sister had meant for her to. She wanted to stop playing, but was afraid of what would happen if she did. Would everything that was drained of color stay that way? She could sense now parts of the world around her opening and other parts closing, but above all changing, folding in, tightening, in ways that made her feel they were being herded into a tighter and tighter chute. What, she worried, will be there to meet us at the other end? Her sister turned again and smiled. Her skin was gray, her teeth gray as if she were carved from stone. Sidra turned and smiled behind her too, and for just a moment thought she glimpsed another fleeting face. But no, it was her imagination, an odd trick of the light. It had to be. There couldn't be anyone following them. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it ended. Another step and sound swelled back up around them and color returned. She and her twin were back on the lawn, not far from their grandfather, and everything was back to normal. We got it wrong, her sister told her. We were close, almost there. I could feel it, but you stepped wrong, or I did, or we both did, and then everything came crashing down. Almost where? Asked Sidra. Her sister chose not to answer. Perhaps she didn't know the answer, or perhaps she simply didn't want to tell Sidra. Where were we walking? Sidra said. What was that place? Why did everything go gray? What happened to the sound? Nowhere, said Celine. Nowhere? Where's that? Her sister frowned. Sidra watched her search all around her with her eyes, looking for some way to explain it. We were between things, her sister finally offered. At least I think so. Between what things? I don't know how to explain, said Celine. I'm still figuring it out. And so they stopped talking about it. If it had been up to Sidra, they would have played again, but her twin insisted. Even then, she made it clear that Sidra didn't have to play, that she could do it without her. She didn't need her. She could do it all by herself, which made Sidra feel like Celine was threatening to take something away from her. Indeed, everything her sister said, she realized later, was carefully constructed to ensure that Sidra would play the game again after all. As soon as they entered their grandfather's field of vision, he began rapidly, desperately blinking. They ignored this, simply began to execute the sequences of the game again. But this time, nothing happened. They were just two girls playing a made-up game, walking in strange, made-up patterns across the lawn. There was no leaching of color, no graying of bodies, no absence of sound. You stepped wrong, Celine accused. Sidra shook her head. I did everything you did. They traced the path backward, taking the sequence apart, but Celine couldn't figure out where they'd gone wrong. We'll do it better tomorrow, she finally said. In the middle of the night, Sidra awoke. Her sister in the bunk above her was moaning, shaking. It seemed like she was saying words that were not words, at least not words from a language that Sidra could recognize. It was an awful sound, and Sidra could not bear it. She climbed the ladder until she could see over the edge and into the top bunk. There was her sister, a blanket all contorted around her. Sidra shook her until she woke up. What is it? Her twin asked. You were having a nightmare, said Sidra, and it was starting to leak out of your mouth. Celine was silent for a while. Yes, she finally said slowly. I suppose that's true. A dream, anyway. Standing on the ladder, holding to the side rail, Sidra waited for Celine to go on, but she did not. Do you want to tell me about it? Prompted Sidra. No, said Celine. No, I don't think I do. She was quiet, then finally said, It was just a dream. The next time they played the game, they must have somehow gotten the sequence right because it began to happen again. There came, as she focused on following her sister's steps, a moment when Sidra began to pass into a different relation to the world. There was the fading of the colors of the world as she knew it, and then, without warning, the snuffing out of all sound, the rippling in the air as Celine clapped her hands, the barest hint of that translucent wall. Sidra reached out and touched the wall and felt it, or felt something anyway, for just a moment before the rippling of the air calmed and the wall was gone, her hand sliding right through. Ahead of her, her twin hesitated, trying to decide where to go. What was the right next step in the sequence? Her twin lifted her foot tentatively, then set it down again in exactly the same spot. Then, a little more confidently, she repeated this gesture, then did it a third time. When she brought her gray foot down to rest again on the now gray grass this third time, the air tore open just beside her. Celine stared into the sudden, impossible opening, then stepped up to it and waited just outside for Sidra to come. Sidra, amazed, quickly moved to the place Celine had left, stomped her own foot thrice, then joined her sister. Together, they went through. I think I'm going to stop there. Story goes on and gets stranger.
Wow, thank you both.
Yeah.
It's really
Welcome.
fantastic. Really reminded after listening to you both read, remember years ago when Kevin Killian was kind of had some writer's blocky kind of thing. And I think Kathy Acker said, hey, you should try using horror as a vehicle. And he began immersing himself in Argento's films
Hmm.
and came out with the Argento series. And Dorothea, I'm really struck by your work because it just reminded me so much of what Kevin had tried to do and kind of process stuff and how horror is really such an amazing vehicle to be able to process things that are just like very, very difficult.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I just want to say, Brian, I love that story, and I really need to know what happens. Well, yeah, that's very important to.
I
I
appreciate that.
I can't wait to find out. But Hera says me too. But anyway, yeah, no, it's interesting. Yeah, that you brought up Kevin and thinking about that because when I first started writing The Shining, I kind of, it was in the pandemic, kind of the beginning part of the pandemic, and I was feeling very hopeless. I was actually trying to write a horror novel myself, and I was just thought, forget poetry. I don't need poetry. Poetry is the last thing I need right now. And somehow in that moment, I remembered kind of my old friends of The Shining, which has been an obsession of mine for at least 20 years or not. And if you, know me at all, that's kind of like sometimes all I talk about is just like Shining references. So, which can get really tiresome. I'm glad nobody here really knows me well, won't get annoyed. But yeah, so I kind of, yeah, it was sort of a similar thing where I had sort of turned poetry away from myself, and The Shining kind of came in as like a, alchemical force, or just like they, became the form of the poems to invite me back into, something that was so vital to me. So I think that's, yeah, so fascinating that worked for Kevin, and just like it's a beautiful story, and maybe a beautiful medicine for so many people. Perhaps.
Yeah.
I wonder, yeah, why that is, why horror can be such a good antidote to writer's block, if that's a thing.
There's something really comforting sometimes about horror too. It's like it's weird to imagine that that could be comforting, but I have this experience too where there's certain films that I watch over and over, and it's almost like they become a close friend after a while. So yeah. And I was saying before we started, I've taught The Shining before, and it's really interesting to me to, to when I'm teaching it, to watch it and experience it again and have this familiarity, and then have students who, some of them who know it really well and others who don't know it at all, and watch the different reactions as they're watching it. So
Yeah, yeah, I know there is something about that comfort. And I always think about how kind of, yeah, just the world can be such a nightmare. Real life is like, a kind of waking, walking nightmare, but you don't know exactly what's going to happen. And there's something that's such a solace and comforting, especially if you know a horror story well. Because even as awful as it can be, there is a predictability, so the monster is going to come in, and it's almost like you get excited to see him because he is your friend, reminding you of how awful life is, but in like a kind of more fun way.
controlled way, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. So I'm really intrigued that you were working on a horror novel as well. Do you think
Yeah.
that's something you'll eventually go back to, or you don't know?
Yes, yes. I was over the winter. I was working so hard to change it. It's about a woman who is kind of a Karen, and her name is Katie, and she's sort of, yeah, like a mix between, like a Gwyneth Paltrow person. Sorry, like that, and Real Housewife kind of person. And she gets possessed by a demon, and she's kind of, she's just like an awful person, but I like her. I find her really likable. And
Uh,
I was it's all in third person, and over the, winter I was trying to change it all to first person. And yeah, so that hopefully maybe that'll do the trick and make it better.
I mean,
Maybe
yeah, that sounds really interesting. So my 10-year-old son just learned the word Karen at school, and now he wants to decide if everyone is or isn't a Karen.
Yeah, it's funny because Karens come in, different forms,
Yeah.
obviously. Yeah, there is. There's like a particular kind of, yeah, Real Housewife kind of, that kind of new agey Karen that
Yeah,
I love that because they are fun.
yeah, yeah.
I'm really fascinated by how, like, horror has evolved over the decades, especially beginning, like, in the earlier part of the last previous century with, those, like Nosferatu, where
Mhm.
a lot was left to your imagination, all the way through to, kind of the things like Saw, which, I mean, it goes to some extremes. I mean, it's so visceral and you know, um, and I was wondering what, both your thoughts are on the trajectory of horror in film, and what you both think that actually has to say about where we're at as a culture in terms of, like our obsessions, our fears, our,
Mm.
ambitions, stuff like that.
Maybe I'll start, Dorothea, and then you can take over. Yeah, I mean, I think it's there has, for whatever reason, been a huge explosion of horror, both in fiction and in film. The thing I just edited an issue of McSweeney's, which is a horror issue and really focuses on horror. And the thing that I tried to do with that was just think about, where's not so much what's people's kind of knee-jerk sense of what horror is, but where's horror going? What can it do? What are the possibilities? How's it changing? And one thing that I think has really happened in the last decade, both in fiction and film, is it's really kind of blown up in really interesting ways in terms of just what's possible and what's I think that the horror fiction audience has become very sophisticated. With horror and film, I mean, the funny thing about that is that there's so much horror being made right now in terms of film, and people seem that on the one hand, you have the kind of horror junkie who will just watch everything. And I have some friends who are like that. And then there's other people who are very discerning about it. So the people who are watching Saw are not necessarily the same people who are watching The Pretty Thing That Lived in the House, or there's this range of what horror can do, and people, it's really interesting when I teach the horror class, getting in conversations with students and figuring out where their boundaries are, and things, So I don't know. I mean, I see it as interesting and really helpful. I mean, the first Saw movie has a lot that's interesting about it. It definitely does not leave a lot to the imagination. But then it's the question is where do you go from there? And one of the tricky things about movies and Hollywood in particular is that the tendency is, if something works, let's do it again, and let's do it again, let's do it again. So yeah.
Yeah, I feel what's always kind of fascinated me about horror is like just its connection to poetry. So I think in terms of that intersection, it's just always been there. And I think there's something that they share that both kind of you need the unexpected, for it to really work, or for just to keep up the, excitement of the reader, and the thing that almost like I think of like this intersection between horror, poetry, and comedy, like the twist and the turn and the volta, and just like how that's so key to those forms. And so in a way, I think I've come to this realization in, the last few years that, all poems are kind of horror poems in a way, because they all have a twist, even if it's in their form, it doesn't have to be the monster, but even in the content or the sound or just the way that they're moving. And so, yeah, and jokes do as well, all that sort of thing. And so, yeah, I just am excited about that realization and the possibilities,
Yeah.
and what that means, and how it doesn't, I think a lot of times when you say horror, in a popular way, people think of like scaring someone or fear or shock. And I'm so fascinated with, again, what that could mean formally, and not necessarily in the image or like the traditional trope of that, like the witch or the demon, but the ways that shock happens just in language naturally.
Yeah. And I do agree that there's so much in common with comedy and the way it works structurally in horror. and the way it works structurally. It's really an interesting thing to notice. So, and then there, I mean, the other thing that's really interesting right now is abstract horror in terms of films. So things like Skinamarink, which is a very, very, almost nothing happens in it, but there's something that's terrifying about it at the same time. And there is a kind of very strange visual poetry to some of those pieces as well.
Yeah, which brings us to like horror video games, and now that's sort of exploded, and a lot of subtlety in those. But before I forget, I don't know if either of you have read The Secret Life of Puppets by Victoria Nelson.
I have.
And she touches on how there's a connection between horror and religiosity, or horror and the transpersonal. And I'm wondering if either of you have had thoughts about that.
As an excommunicated Mormon, I probably do have thoughts about that. Yeah, I mean, I do think one of my books is called Patriarchal Horror. I have a book called Father of Lies that gets kind of framed in that way, and it's very much about the horror of religion. But there is also, something almost ritual about at least certain kinds of horror in terms of the way it operates.
Yeah, I think yeah, having been raised not with like a very strong spiritual background, but definitely having, yeah, a religious background, I think that it is very much true, and thinking about that idea, of ritual, and just like when we think about horror as like manifest in, in literature or film, there are ways that things are set up for the ceremony of the horror, and whether that's somebody, a character is going to be sacrificed in some way, or something like that, or that someone is going to die, like that there's like a stage set always to that, which feels like a lot of the performance of, kind of religious ritual across many religions. And there again, I think of like a comfort in that I feel like when you're engaging with horror, it is like you're engaging a little bit with a kind of religious, community that has its own tropes, that has its own structures, where when you're really enjoying a horror film, or like I love, Freddy Krueger, and the way things are setting up, even if it is, sound, or you just know by the creepiness of the trees or something like that, it's a beautiful day and something's about to happen. It is kind of like a prayer to then have the chaos or havoc that he's going to do in this kind of controlled, fantastical way. And I think that's like you're kind of sharing that with other horror people in a way you might in any religion, when you're watching a priest, go about these rituals or something.
And Nightmare on Elm Street too has these amazing alchemical references throughout, which is really fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, yes, I mean Freddy is a I think of so many like horror, people as they are kind of gods and goddesses. I mean, you really could pray to Freddy. I mean, I don't know that you'd want to. I haven't, but I would have like a Carrie shrine, like I would pray to Carrie, and I know she would get things done if you needed her to. Like that would be worth your prayers for sure. So I don't know if you could trust Freddie if you were praying to Freddie, what he might not come through for you to do the thing you needed him to do. He's not as trustworthy, but yeah, I like, and that's, I think when I was thinking of Wendy, her as like this beautiful goddess in a horror that you kind of can pray to, and she's, the eternal mother and saintly and all these beautiful things.
I want to open it up a little for the audience. If anyone has any thoughts, questions, comments, please do post them. I think I'll continue with one little thing. In Gothica by Victoria Nelson, she talks a little bit about the hybridity of humans mixing with vampires, and these kind of like hybrid sort of beings coming into being, which reminded me a lot about, like cyborgs and some of Donna Haraway's work, and how it crosses over kind of into that realm, that we're also trying to find ways of kind of coping at this kind of juncture where we're not quite human and yet we're not quite machine. and then all the associated horror with that reality.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one thing that's really terrifying for us right now is this sense of, I mean, change is always something that's terrifying. The fear that things were going to stay too much the same is also really terrifying. The way things recur, but that sense of, the post-human for a lot of people is seems like grounds for hope. For other people, it seems like, pretty terrifying or potentially terrifying. So yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because kind of, thinking about how horror connects to sort of letting things in that are beyond the familiar. And they're the unfamiliar but the familiar, and that kind of uncanny quality to them. And I feel that, there's that idea of the robot or the machine as now being so familiar. I mean, we're all on machines right now, but it's completely unfamiliar in this very basic way. And we're letting it into us. We're like emitting all of these waves, not that we need to think about it now, but sound waves and Wi-Fi and everything. We're kind of where we are in a way commingling our spirit with it. And there's something really terrifying about that.
Yeah.
So Nicoletta has a question. Dorothea, did you write while the Shining film was playing in the background, or is it from memory?
Oh, thank you for that question. Although that would be a great writing exercise that I would like to do while it's playing in the background. And I have done things like that with my classes actually with room 237, which I'm not actually in right now, in case you were worried, but I would actually be very happy if I were. I know what to expect. It would be fine. But yeah, no, it actually was from memory. When I was writing the book, I kind of wrote it from memory in the sequence of the movie, and I had the book. There was an opening scene, and that poem got cut, and things got reconfigured. But it was kind of, yeah, from memory, and there was like a delight in that, and that I wasn't necessarily looking really closely at the imagery. It was just my impression of the imagery.
Did you find yourself drawing on the book a little bit too, or much, or was it mainly more the movie than the book?
It was more the movie than the book. Yeah. Yeah, I think some of maybe the tensions like in the Wendy character and some of the ways that Wendy speaks that she doesn't necessarily speak in the movie is some of that, but I think the movie kind of was what has
Yeah.
always etched in me.
Well, we find ourselves at the top of the hour. Is there anything the two of you would like to touch on before we sign off?
I don't think so.
No, just to thank you for having me, and thank you so much, Brian, for reading with me. Thank you so much. It was such an honor.
It was my pleasure, and thanks as well for having us. City Lights is I really love the store, so it's nice to be here, even if only virtually.
Well, it's a real pleasure for us to have you both grace our virtual halls, and hoping sooner than later we get both of you inside the store in the poetry room. It'd
Yes.
be a lot of fun. So such a great pleasure. Also want a big shout out to Catherine at Wave Books for all of her efforts in making tonight happen and for all the great work that she does over there. City Lights carries a full selection of Wave books. You can check them out at our website at citylights.com, or better yet, come on down, browse the store, because it is one of the great browsing experiences of all time. We're located in San Francisco's historic North Beach district. We're open 7 days a week from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. We're also a publishing house as well as a bookstore. We continue to publish poetry as well as literature and translation, nonfiction, what have you. We have new poetry out from Clark Coolidge, from Joyce Mansour, from Mimi Tempest. So check out our website to learn more. Tonight's event has been made possible by support from the City Lights Foundation, continuing the legacy of our founder, the late Lawrence Ferlinghetti, through our public events, through a publishing program and educational outreach, all dedicated to sustaining a vibrant community of readers, writers, and independent thinkers. So thank you both. Thank you all in the audience. Please take care, everyone. Best to you and best for the new year. And we hope to see you all again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.